Here, let me tell you. Now, it started thousands of years ago. We don't know exactly when. It's somewhere in Asia. We don't know exactly where. Maybe it was a young man. Maybe he was getting up in the morning. Maybe he was doing some of his morning ritual and some of his morning exercises, wandering through the bamboo forest beside the big river. And he's wandering and wandering. He's come by this spot 100 times or more, but for some reason, on this morning, he decides to stop and listen. And he hears the wind as it whistles through the bamboo. And he hears something he's never heard before, just a kind of a whistle sound. And he reaches for one of those stalks of bamboo. He pulls it out. He looks at it, and for some reason, nobody knows why. Nobody knows what the inspiration was. He puts it to his lips, and he blows. And the sound that comes out is glorious. He thinks, oh my God, what have I discovered here? He gathers up a lot of different bamboo shoots. He takes them home with him that night, and he starts to experiment over and over again. He finds that if the stalk is long, the sound is different than if it's shorter. It's different if the stalk is thicker than it is when it's thinner. Over days and days and months and years, he experiments. He discovers that if he puts holes in it, he doesn't have to worry about the length. He can make various sounds from it. And he experiments, and he builds on the sound, and he refines it. And then when he dies, the knowledge of his experiment has traveled far beyond the small town that he lives in. And people all around the country start to take up this instrument, refining it and building on it. Eventually, over time, the instrument travels across the water to the islands of Japan. And there it's adopted by a Zen Buddhist sect. They give it a name, the Shakuhachi. And they incorporate the flute in their daily meditation practice. They play the instrument for hours and hours and hours every single day. When they're not playing, they're refining it, developing, creating the sound so that eventually the instrument has a sound that reflects the highest reaches of the human spirit, the deepest depths of the human soul, and everything in between. Now the monks, they take to putting baskets on their heads so they can block out all the different senses. They can concentrate only on the sound of the shakuhachi. And with baskets on their head, they wander the realm of Japan, begging for alms. Anybody got any alms for this time? That's how they make their living, getting alms one after another. Now eventually the influence and the power of this group starts to grow, and the emperor starts to feel threatened. So at a certain point, he decides to outlaw the shakuhachi. The troops come into the village and they confiscate all the shakuhachis, but you can't get rid of the shakuhachi. It's easily hidden under your robes. If it is taken away, there's bamboo everywhere. You can go out and make a new one. So the practice continues underground. Late at night, you can see people wandering, you can hear the monks wandering through the forest, deep in the woods, playing the shakuhachi. Now, over time, there came to be another emperor, and he loved the shakuhachi. He thought it was the most wondrous instrument in the world. So the sect was rehabilitated. They were given free passage anywhere they wanted to in the country, all through the realm. They didn't have to stop for customs or check in with anybody. They could go wherever they wanted. Now, in the end, this proved to be the undoing of the instrument. You see, the mercenaries, warriors, the last remnants of the samurai, they discovered that if they could just learn how to play the flute, they could join the sect. There were no membership lists anywhere, and they could use that in their spying activities and moved forward. They even incorporated the shakuhachi into their martial arts practice. They started to use it as a weapon. So the next emperor, he was looking at this situation, seeing the deteriorating situation here, and he decided to ban the shakuhachi outright. He disbanded the sect. He took away all their instruments. But like I said, you could never get rid of the shakuhachi. It continued deep underground. This had all happened in the early 1800s. So it was 150 years later that Danny, Bob, and I were sitting around in the living room, and the knowledge of the shakuhachi was starting to get known by musicians all around the world. Danny was one of them. Now, Bob and Danny, they figured because Vancouver was 1,000 miles closer to Japan than Calgary was, we'd be sure to find a shakuhachi. So I looked at Danny, I said, we gotta find a shakuhachi. And that began the Shakuhachi quest. So it starts the next morning at breakfast. There's me, Bob, Danny, we're sitting around in a restaurant, and there's the waitress taking the order. She says, anything else? And Dan says, yeah, I'm trying to find a shakuhachi. Can you help me out? The waitress says, was that bacon or ham you wanted with that eggs? She wasn't into it, but some other people overheard us, and they started coming over the table and asking questions, and Danny was only too happy to tell them all the stories he knew about the shakuhachi and all the lore about the shakuhachi fruit. Pretty soon we have a big table of people gathered around us, trading ideas, brainstorming, thinking about where we could get a shakuhachi. Next, we head off to a record store. So there's Bob, tiki-tiki-da, tiki-da-da-da, tiki-daka-tiki-daka-da. There's me hanging out by the Dylan section. And then there's Danny. He's at the counter with all the clerks gathered around him, all the customers, 20 or 30 customers hanging out. Everybody's talking about the shakuhachi, trading information, giving ideas, that sort of thing. We moved on to a music instrument store, the same thing, Danny gathering people, talking about the shakuhachi. Now, the Dylan concert that had been the whole reason for this weekend, well, it sort of came and went, and it wasn't one of Dylan's great phases. We didn't make much of an impression on us. Besides, we had a new obsession. We had to find a shakuhachi. Now, over the course of this weekend, we'd sort of check back into my bachelor apartment every once in a while. We'd grab some pizza and some beer, a little bit of rest. But over a couple of days, well, it started to smell a little bit rank in there. Something that Danny termed the sweet smell of men enjoying themselves. Now, the next day we headed out, and we're wandering around, same thing, record stores, bookstores, all over the place. It was the weekend of festivals. We even ended up down at the Powell Street Festival, which is the great festival of Japanese culture. For sure we thought we'd find something, but did they refer us to people and maybe that person wasn't in town, or they'd give us some ideas and we'd go there, just wouldn't quite pan out. Finally, towards the end of the day, we're in another record store. There's Bob, tiki-tiki-da, tiki-da-da-da, tiki-daka-tiki-daka-da. He looks up. Bob's a man of few words. He just looks up, he says, maybe we're going to have to let the shakuhachi find us. Now, Danny and I, we look at each other. We're not ready to give up. We have to find a shakuhachi. But the next day it came to a close, and we still hadn't found one. And Bob and Danny, they were going out for one last night on the town. They were going to leave the next day. They were going to have some dinner and go see some music in some club. Me, I had to stay home. I had to go to work the next day. But I got to tell you, I was a little sad when I went to bed that night because we hadn't found a shakuhachi. Now, Bob and Danny, they came in about 2 in the morning. They were laughing and patting each other in the back and really excited about something. I didn't know what it was. But the next morning I get up and I'm heading through the kitchen towards the bathroom, and I look on the kitchen table. God damn it, there's 2 pieces of bamboo with holes in them. Could it be? Now, it turned out that Bob and Danny, they'd gone to the very last place somebody had told them about. It was a music supply store, but it only sold within the school system. It wasn't open to the public. And besides, this was a long weekend. It was supposed to be closed to anybody, but there was a guy in there. He's doing a little bit of inventory, a little cleanup. Danny knocked on the door. He talked to him. He gave him the whole story about the guy wandering through the bamboo forest and the monks. And he laid it on super thick, all the anything he could think of, the weapons and the meditation and all this. And the guy thinks for a minute and he says, you know what, I think we might have something you might be interested in. And he goes all the way into the back storage room. He takes off these 2 boxes. They've been there for years and years. They're covered in dust. They blow the dust off, and sure enough, there's some Japanese writing on the boxes. Now, it's Bob that opens up one of the boxes, and he takes a look at it, and he blows into it, and he gets a sound right away. Now this is amazing. Usually it takes months and months and months of practice to even get a simple sound out of the shakuhachi. It can take years and years to even play a tune, and a lifetime to master it. So for Bob to just pick it up and make a sound is incredible. Now this pisses Danny off incredibly. Danny's the professional musician. Can't have his Bob just playing that right out of the box. So when they left, Bob was driving and Danny's in the passenger seat, desperately trying to make a sound out of the shakuhachi. Now I later found that they made their way up to the Rogers Pass, and they had both learned how to make sort of a rudimentary